My husband's family has always viewed me as inferior, so I decided to drop a truth bomb during dinner. I'm Isabella, 30, and I've been married to my husband, Daniel, for 4 years. Our relationship has always been strong, but from the very beginning, I sensed that his family regarded me as an outsider. They come from a long line of wealth, the kind of people who prioritize Ivy League degrees, exclusive country clubs, and corporate prestige. In contrast, I built my own business from scratch. Financially, I've done quite well for myself, but to them, I was just a woman who didn't fit in. The first time I met Daniel's parents, it was clear they had expected someone entirely different. His mother, Margaret, shook my hand as if she were evaluating me, while his father, Robert, offered a polite but distant smile. They inquired about my background, and the moment they realized I didn't hail from a wealthy family, their enthusiasm noticeably waned. Daniel later confided that they had always hoped he would marry someone from their social circle, someone with an Ivy League education, a high-powered job in finance or law, and family connections that mattered. Over the years, I became accustomed to their passive-aggressive comments, little jabs here and there about my modest upbringing or how fortunate I was to have married into their family. Initially, Daniel defended me, shutting them down whenever they crossed the line, but his family would always dismiss it as mere joking. His older sister, Olivia, was the worst. An investment banker with an inflated sense of self-importance, she never missed an opportunity to undermine my career. I run my own business, something I built through years of hard work. It's successful, but because it's not a high-profile corporate job, they don't consider it real work. Every family gathering followed the same routine. Olivia or Margaret would make some offhand comment about the unpredictability of small businesses or joke that I must feel relieved to have financial security now that I was part of their family. Daniel would give me an apologetic look, and I would bite my tongue, knowing that any pushback would only lead to drama. Then came the dinner that changed everything. Daniel's parents invited us to an upscale restaurant, the kind where the menu doesn't list prices. On the way there, Daniel warned me that his mother was in a foul mood and suggested I ignore any rude comments. I knew what that meant, another evening of them looking down on me while pretending it was all in good fun. The moment we arrived, I sensed that the night would be long. They had arranged the seating so that Daniel and I weren't next to each other. Instead, I found myself beside one of his younger cousins, who immediately began asking condescending questions about my work. Margaret made her usual joke, something about how I must be relieved to have financial stability now that I was part of their family. Olivia laughed, shaking her head as if it were all amusing. She leaned back in her chair and, in that smug tone of hers, declared that running a business wasn't the same as having a real career. She made a show of explaining how people like her had to answer to executives and shareholders, implying that my success was merely a stroke of luck. I glanced at Daniel. He looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything, not right away. He was always careful not to escalate things with his family. That was the moment I decided I was done holding back. I leaned forward, locking eyes with Margaret. I wasn't going to say anything at first, but since she brought it up, I thought we should discuss money. The room fell silent. You could hear the clinking of glasses being set down on the table. Margaret's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Daniel gripped my arm, not aggressively, but as if he were trying to gauge where I was headed with this. Robert straightened in his seat, his usual polite smile now frozen. I took my time, letting the tension build before I continued. You talk about financial stability as if I need Daniel to support me, but let's be honest, who do you think has more money sitting in their account right now? Because I know exactly where I stand. Olivia scoffed, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. Margaret's fingers tightened around her wine glass. You worked in finance, Olivia, I said, turning toward her. You love numbers, so let's do some numbers. My company pulled in over 7 figures last year, no bosses, no executives, just me making decisions that actually pay off. And unlike the firms you work for, I don't have to worry about getting laid off if the market shifts. Olivia's smirk vanished, and Margaret's jaw tightened. They weren't expecting this. I leaned back, allowing the weight of my words to settle in. So if we're talking about money, let's be real. My smile barely contained itself as I watched the reactions unfold. Olivia leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her eyes narrowed as if she were trying to decipher whether I was bluffing. I let the tension linger for a few seconds before continuing. I wasn't going to gloat, but I certainly wasn't backing down. I explained that I had been running my business for 6 years, steadily growing it until it now generated multi-million-dollar revenue annually, not just once, not just a lucky streak, but consistent numbers year after year. Someone at the far end of the table exhaled sharply, perhaps a cousin. I could hear whispers ripple through the room. Olivia was the first to react, her scoff cutting through the silence. But what do you actually have in assets? Her tone was sharp and dismissive, as if she were trying to salvage whatever little ground she had left. I met her gaze without hesitation. Fully paid-off properties, a diverse stock portfolio, no debt, and more than enough liquidity to retire tomorrow if I wanted to. I didn't need to check to know that Daniel's father had stiffened. I could feel the change in his posture from across the table. Margaret, on the other hand, had gone quiet, which told me the information had hit harder than she was willing to admit. But Olivia wasn't finished. Anyone can make money for a few years, she muttered. It's about long-term sustainability. I shrugged, a smirk creeping onto my face. Funny, considering my portfolio has outperformed yours consistently for the past 5 years. That shut her up. She blinked at me, her jaw tightening. She knew I had access to financial reports, public information for someone in her position. If I was claiming to have outperformed her, then I had checked the numbers, I wasn't just guessing. Ethan cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. Well, dear, we've never been the type to judge people by their bank accounts. It was such a blatant lie that I didn't even bother responding. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, waiting. Sure enough, realization dawned on them a moment later. The years of condescending comments, the constant implication that I was lucky to have married Daniel, all of it had been built on the assumption that I was beneath them financially. And now, they couldn't take any of it back. The final blow came when I mentioned, almost casually, that one of my business ventures had indirectly contracted Margaret's firm in the past, meaning she had, at some point, profited off my work without even knowing it. The whispers at the table grew louder, a younger cousin covered his mouth, clearly amused, while someone else stifled a laugh. Margaret's fingers curled around her fork, still holding on to the hope of regaining control, but there was nothing left to say, no witty remark, no dismissive joke. The entire table had just witnessed a shift in the balance of power. While they wouldn't acknowledge it openly, the atmosphere had changed. The whispers wouldn't stop overnight, but the seed of doubt in their social hierarchy had been planted. Daniel had been quiet through most of it, but when I glanced at him, he wasn't uncomfortable anymore. He wasn't trying to diffuse the situation or change the subject, instead, he was watching his mother carefully, waiting to see what she would do next. She attempted to move on, bringing up a completely unrelated topic about a recent trip they had taken, but nobody followed her lead. The dinner limped along after that, but the mood had soured. Ethan started acting overly sweet to me, throwing exaggerated compliments my way as if that would erase years of condescension. Olivia remained silent, her ego clearly still recovering. When Daniel gave me a subtle nod, I knew it was time to leave. We stood, and as I shook Margaret's hand, I met her gaze one last time. Next time, maybe get to know someone before assuming you're better than them. Her grip tightened slightly before she let go, offering no response, just a tight-lipped nod. We walked out, leaving them to stew in their own discomfort. The fallout began before we even got home. Daniel's phone vibrated during the car ride back, messages flooding in from the family group chat. Some cousins found the whole thing hilarious, sending crying laughing emojis, while others, mostly from the older generation, were less amused. Margaret's message came in first, passive-aggressive as expected, something about insecurity and showing off. I didn't hesitate to respond, simply correcting the record. I was done being disrespected. Interestingly, Olivia stayed silent. No snide remarks, no attempts to reclaim lost ground. She had gone from the loudest in the room to completely absent from the conversation. Daniel's uncle, someone I had barely spoken to before, sent me a private message admitting he had always found Margaret insufferable and this family to welcome me. Daniel didn't hesitate this time. Then I guess we won't be coming around, he said firmly. After that, the family split into factions. Some took Margaret's side, while others, especially the younger generation, openly sided with us. One of Daniel's younger cousins even reached out privately, simply saying, "I misjudged you." A few days later, an invitation arrived for another family gathering, clearly an attempt to smooth things over and put me back in my place. I made my decision before Daniel even asked. Unless they actually change, I don't see the point. For the first time, he didn't argue. The car ride home was quiet. Daniel stared out the window, his fingers tapping lightly against his leg. Every so often, he glanced at me, as if he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to start. Eventually, he spoke, admitting he was relieved I had finally stood up for myself. However, he also knew his family well enough to predict their next move. They weren't the type to let things go. His phone vibrated, then again, and again, the family group chat had exploded. The first messages came from the younger cousins, short reactions filled with laughing emojis and comments like, "That was legendary," or "Best dinner ever." Then came the more serious ones. Daniel's father sent a long message about how I had created unnecessary tension, while Margaret's was more direct, calling me insecure and accusing me of showing off. I took Daniel's phone and typed out a response before he could overthink it, simply correcting the record, "I am done being disrespected." Then I handed the phone back to him. Olivia was noticeably absent from the conversation. The same person who had spent years making snide comments about me had nothing to say now, no weak comeback, no attempt to regain control of the narrative. She had been humiliated in front of the entire family, and for the first time, she had nothing to fall back on. Then, out of nowhere, a private message came in from Daniel's uncle. He had always been on the quieter side during family gatherings, never outright rude, but never going out of his way to be friendly either. His message was short and to the point. "Honestly, I've been waiting for someone to put Margaret in her place for years." Well done. Daniel barely had time to process that before his father called. He didn't waste any time getting to the point, starting with the usual act as if none of the past conversations had ever happened, pretending I had completely misread the situation. He insisted that Margaret's remarks had never been meant to hurt me, that I had taken everything too personally. Daniel put the call on speaker, and I let him talk, allowing him to go through the usual script of rewriting history, downplaying the years of condescension, and making it seem like I was the unreasonable one. When he finally stopped, I answered for Daniel. "I'm not dealing with this anymore." There was a pause, a shift in tone. Ethan dropped the fake niceties. "If you keep creating division, this family is going to have problems." And there it was, the first real attempt at control. Daniel didn't flinch. "Then I guess we're going to have problems." The call ended shortly after that, no resolution, no fake pleasantries, just a quiet understanding that things weren't going back to how they used to be. The next message came from Margaret, another attempt to reassert dominance. This time, it wasn't directed at me, it was aimed at Daniel. "If you want to keep the peace in this family, get your wife in check." I barely had time to read it before Daniel fired back, "If you want to keep a relationship with me, learn to respect my wife." Another long pause in the chat followed, and then the family division started. Some relatives jumped in immediately, siding with Margaret and insisting that I had been out of line and that Daniel was being disrespectful for standing by me. Others, mostly the younger generation, openly defended us. One of Daniel's younger cousins even messaged me directly, saying, "I misjudged you." Days passed, and the dust didn't settle. Then, out of nowhere, Daniel's father extended an invitation to another family gathering. It wasn't phrased as an apology or an attempt to fix things, just a simple, "We're all getting together next weekend. You're both welcome to come." It was obvious what they were trying to do. They weren't sorry, they weren't acknowledging anything. They just wanted to pull us back in, to make us fall in line. I didn't even have to think about my response. Unless they actually change, I don't see the point. Daniel nodded, he didn't argue. For the first time since marrying into this family, I knew things were never going back to how the events unfolded quickly. When he finally paused, Daniel simply said, "We're busy," and ended the call. Meanwhile, Margaret was taking a different approach. She wasn't trying to make peace, she was fuming. Daniel's cousin sent him screenshots from a private family chat, messages from Margaret complaining that I had shown off like a common saleswoman and humiliated her in front of her family. Olivia had jumped in, agreeing that I had merely lucked into money and lacked the sophistication of old wealth. Then Olivia took it a step further, posting a vague social media update about how real money is old money and how some people think wealth equals class. While she didn't name names, a few family members commented, clearly drawing connections to our earlier confrontation. The more they fumed about it, the more obvious it became that they were struggling to accept the truth. Then came their next move. Daniel's parents invited us to an exclusive charity gala, one of those high society events where attendance was as much about status as it was about philanthropy. The message was clear: this was their attempt at a reset, a chance to publicly align themselves with me now that they understood my financial standing. Daniel didn't want to go, he knew his parents too well. But he also understood that if we didn't show up, they would spin the story to make it seem like we were avoiding them because we were the unreasonable ones. In the end, I agreed, not to impress them, but to ensure they understood that they couldn't control the narrative anymore. The moment we arrived, the shift in behavior was obvious. The same family that had spent years dismissing me was now treating me like an asset. Margaret introduced me to her business associates, calling me a brilliant entrepreneur. Ethan spoke about my accomplishments as if he had always been proud of me. Even Olivia forced a tight smile and a handshake, though her eyes told a different story. It didn't take long for Margaret to slip back into her old habits. At one point, she clapped me on the shoulder, her voice just loud enough for others to hear, "You'll fit in if you keep this up." It was the same patronizing tone she had always used, as if I were still earning my place, still proving myself worthy of standing in their world. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I let a small pause settle between us before casually mentioning that I was in talks to acquire a business, one that happened to directly compete with one of her closest associates. I didn't phrase it as a threat, just a fact. The reaction was instant. Ethan quickly changed the subject, a nervous flicker crossing his face. Margaret's posture stiffened just slightly before she recovered, her expression neutral but her jaw tight. Olivia, however, wasn't as composed. She scoffed, muttering something about how business owners get lucky breaks. The jealousy was practically radiating off her. I didn't respond, I didn't need to. The more she tried to tear me down, the more obvious it became that she was the one struggling with her own place in the family hierarchy. As we left, I shook Margaret's hand. It's interesting how things change when the right people start paying attention. Her forced smile barely held, she knew exactly what I meant. A week after the gala, Daniel's parents reached out again. This time, the message was different. Instead of their usual passive-aggressive comments or thinly veiled superiority, they spoke about moving forward as a family. Margaret even used the phrase "starting fresh." It was an obvious shift in tone, too sudden, too deliberate. Daniel didn't trust it, and neither did I. There was no way they had changed overnight. They had spent years treating me like I didn't belong, then weeks scrambling after realizing they had underestimated me. Now, all of a sudden, they wanted to embrace me as family. It wasn't an apology, it was a strategy. Then came the next move. Olivia invited me to a golf event with her friends, no explanation, no fake pleasantries, just a direct invitation. It didn't take much to figure out what was happening. Olivia had never shown any interest in spending time with me before, but now that her family saw me as someone with financial influence, she wanted me in her circle. Maybe she thought I could introduce her to useful connections, maybe she was trying to secure her own footing after the humiliation at dinner. Either way, I declined. That same evening, Margaret called Daniel. She didn't ask about the golf event, she didn't even mention it. Instead, she told him that family support goes both ways and that if I truly wanted to be part of the family, I should consider integrating into their world. It was worded carefully, but the meaning was clear: this wasn't about family, it was about control. In her mind, being accepted by them meant me playing by their rules. A few days later, the real reason father wasn't subtle about it either. He had never shown any real interest in my work before, but now he was suddenly asking pointed questions about my business. Casual at first, he inquired about my expansion plans, how I handled investments, and whether I had considered partnerships. It was so painfully obvious that even Daniel picked up on it immediately. Then Daniel's cousin, the one who had been sending him family chat screenshots, messaged again. Apparently, Margaret had started limiting discussions to a tighter group after suspecting a leak, but the cousins still had access to enough information to know things were spiraling. This time, it was even more revealing. According to them, Margaret and Ethan had already begun discussing alternative financial solutions behind closed doors. They hadn't outright admitted they were struggling, but it was clear they were preparing for the possibility of needing outside help. Based on their recent behavior, it was obvious who they had in mind. Daniel didn't say much when he read the message. He didn't have to. For years, he had told himself that his parents' behavior was just a result of their upbringing, that they didn't mean harm. But now he was seeing the truth. This wasn't about acceptance, it was about leverage. They didn't respect me, and they never would, but they did respect my money. Then came the final move. Margaret and Ethan invited us to dinner, nothing fancy this time, just a private meal at their house framed as a discussion about family unity. We went, not because we believed them, but because we wanted to see just how far they would take it. The moment we sat down, Margaret steered the conversation toward business. She spoke about market volatility, the importance of making smart financial moves, and the benefits of investing in family stability. She took her time, making it sound as casual as possible, but the message was crystal clear. Then finally, she said it, investing in family is always a smart move. There it was, the entire reason for the dinner. I didn't even hesitate. I looked her in the eye and asked, "Are you trying to mend fences, or are you looking for a bailout?" The room went silent. Ethan's expression barely shifted, but there was a brief flicker of something in his eyes, a calculation. He was waiting to see how Margaret would respond. At first, she played the role of the insulted mother, leaning back and sighing as if I had deeply misread the situation. But then, just as quickly, she pivoted. Helping family is a sign of loyalty. I didn't let her continue. I don't mix personal relationships with business. There was nothing left to say after that. Ethan's face hardened, the polite warmth disappeared in an instant. He didn't even try to cover it up. The mask was gone. I guess we were wrong about you after all. Daniel stood up before I could respond. No, you weren't. And just like that, we walked out. After we left that dinner, the shift was immediate. Daniel's parents dropped the fake kindness entirely. There were no more forced smiles, no more pretenses of family unity. Instead, the passive-aggressive comments started rolling in. Daniel's father took the lead, sending carefully worded messages about how money changes people and how true family stands by each other in tough times. He never directly accused me of anything, but the implication was clear. In his mind, I was the problem, not because of anything I had done, but because I refused to be used. Olivia, as expected, made her own attempt at a public jab. She posted online about how some people think wealth means they can abandon family, throwing in a long-winded caption about loyalty, respect, and real values. It was the same old act, subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation but obvious enough that anyone who knew the situation could see what she was doing. I ignored it, but then my business got dragged into it. A mutual business connection reached out. Apparently Margaret had been bad-mouthing me in professional circles, calling me untrustworthy and financially reckless. She was careful with her wording, never outright slandering me, but planting enough doubt that people might hesitate before working with me. What she didn't realize was that I had already been one step ahead. Instead of retaliating directly, I reached out to a shared investor, someone I knew had been considering a deal with Margaret's firm. A quick conversation was all it took to confirm what I already suspected. Margaret was in deeper financial trouble than she let on. She had been banking on new investments to stay afloat, and now, thanks to her own pettiness, I had the opportunity to quietly pull that safety net away. Not long after that, the investor backed out of the deal. The fallout was immediate. Margaret had been counting on that funding, and losing it sent her already struggling company further into crisis. She must have figured out what happened because the next